Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Will Volodymyr Zalinski and Vladimir Putin get to sit by one table to discuss the terms of a possible peace deal, or are the hopes of that meeting just a smokescreen for Russia to win more time? What security guarantees will Kyiv obtain from its Western allies for a chance at freedom? More on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at some other headlines of tonight. Russian drone strikes near Polish village over 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Donald Trump calls Hungary's Orban, urging him to accept Ukraine's EU accession bid. How a march across Europe turns each step into a tribute to Ukraine's wounded. While Russian officials claim they are open to peace, the Kremlin's forces continue their merciless attacks on Ukraine. This, as Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appears to be contradicting the White House's claims that President Zelensky and Putin will meet. Our correspondent in Ukraine, Alex Kadier, has been following this diplomatic whirlwind and sent this report with more details.
Well, communications from the White House would suggest they got the impression that the Russian side was willing to engage in peace, willing to engage in a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. But the evidence on the ground suggests something very different indeed. At least 3 civilians were killed in the last 24 hours, 34 injured in Russian attacks across 5 different regions of the country, including Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, and as well as the Odessa region, where energy infrastructure was targeted. So clearly, those Russian attacks, 2 missiles fired in the last 24 hours, are still going on. I would add to that we've heard from Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, contradicting effectively what the White House said about a meeting between President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, saying that they were willing to raise the level of officials, but not confirming any meeting with the Russian president or the Ukrainian leader. Also saying that if those two meet, it has to be at the end of the process. What about those security guarantees? Well, Russia's saying it could agree to security guarantees for Ukraine so long as it has a veto on those security guarantees, effectively making them null and void. Clearly, Russia now frustrating the process that the US thought was ongoing. I spoke exclusively in the last few hours with Mikhailo Podolyak, who is the advisor to the head of the presidential office here in Ukraine, and I asked him what Ukraine expects from this potential meeting between President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin.
The president of Ukraine is ready for any meeting, anywhere, organized by the appropriate body. It could be anything, but the real issue lies elsewhere. It's about Putin's fears. He is afraid that something might go wrong, that it won't be his platform, that he will lack control and guarantees. That is why he will carefully surround the meeting with stringent security parameters. For Putin, it is important to receive guarantees that he can arrive and leave without any legal problems. Putin likes to dominate, but that is impossible with President Zelensky. He also likes to raise fake topics that do not exist in reality. He sees the world in a distorted way, but none of this will work with Zelensky.
So it seems for now that the White House's impression of what Russia was willing to engage with seems to have perhaps been a little bit misguided. The Russians throwing a bit of a smoke screen on these negotiations, not clear when a meeting can happen, how it can happen, despite the fact the Ukrainian side says they're willing to meet whenever it's convenient. In Ukraine, I'm Alex Kadier for TVP World.
An accident or a provocation as part of Russia's hybrid war against Poland. An explosion of an unmanned aerial vehicle woke up residents in the middle of the night in eastern Poland near Osiny village. It was later confirmed by the Polish government that the drone came from Russia, landing 100 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. No injuries were reported, though 3 local houses suffered significant damage. Franciszek Pilis and Karolina Stoltzman have more on the topic.
What began as a peaceful night in eastern Poland was abruptly disturbed.
There was a huge bang, really. Because the windows were open, you could smell sulfur, something burning. It was very ominous.
Polish authorities say the object, confirmed by the Polish Foreign Ministry to be a Shahed-type drone, came from Russia, accusing Moscow of provoking NATO at a very sensitive time.
Once again, we're facing provocations from the Russian Federation. Once again, we're seeing a Russian drone during a special time, when discussions about peace are taking place. We're facing this at a time filled with hope for a possible end to the war, which Russia is waging on Ukraine, which also threatens the safety of NATO countries. Russia is once again provoking us.
Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, vowed to escalate the issue and hold the perpetrator accountable.
Another violation of our airspace from the east confirms that Poland's most important mission in NATO is the defense of our own territory. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs will issue a protest against the perpetrator.
The village of Osiny, where the explosion occurred, is located roughly 100 kilometers from the Polish border with Ukraine and around 80 kilometers from its border with Belarus. Poland is far from the only NATO country to have been provoked by Russia's drones, as other NATO members have also fallen victim to aerial incursions ever since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Airspace incursions and drone provocations have occurred 8 times in Moldova, 3 times in Romania, 3 times in Lithuania, twice in Latvia. These are only drone-related incidents, once in Bulgaria. This time, the provocation was directed at Poland.
The deputy operational commander of the Polish Armed Forces, Major General Dariusz Malinowski, said the drone was military in nature but lacked a warhead, describing it as a decoy UAV. The investigation is still ongoing. For TVP World, Franciszek Pilis.
As high-profile meetings take place daily to push Ukraine closer to a potential ceasefire, Donald Trump made it clear that the U.S. will not have its boots on the ground as he expects European leaders to take charge. Now, the question remains, what kind of peacekeeping mission can each country involved provide? Ovidiusz Nicieja reports on the latest guarantees offered by the coalition countries.
As diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine are gaining momentum, behind the scenes, NATO generals have met for a video conference to prepare for what might follow. The meeting was attended by Chair of NATO's Military Committee, Admiral Giuseppe Cavo-Dragone, and NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Alexis Grinkowicz, as well as 32 defense chiefs from the alliance. They reportedly discussed how a peacekeeping mission could take shape if a deal is reached. President Trump has recently proposed that the US could provide air support as part of security guarantees, but explicitly ruled out sending US soldiers to Ukraine. Poland has taken a similar stance.
We will not send Polish troops to Ukraine. We have other commitments to our allies, who are, by the way, understanding of our decisions. Protecting NATO's eastern flanks, particularly the Polish-Belarusian border, where at any given time there are around 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers stationed, securing the frontier. We are also committed to providing infrastructure and logistics support for a prospective peacekeeping mission.
France and the UK have signaled interest in taking part in a peace force. But the UK's top military chief has made it clear, British troops won't be deployed to the front lines. Instead, the UK could help secure Ukrainian airspace and maritime routes. The Swedish Prime Minister has said that his country could offer air surveillance and potentially naval support. Lithuania's president has offered to send some 200 soldiers to guard future peace, but added that it's too early to talk about deploying troops to Ukraine. And the needs are vast. Ukraine's front line stretches over 1,000 kilometers.
A force of, let's say, 50,000 men, no matter how it's armed, would be unlikely to deter the Russians from considering a way to attack a much smaller force. So the force would have to be very substantial in terms of size, and it would have to be very substantial in terms of capacity.
Zelensky mentioned the figure of 200,000 who would be needed. Obviously, that sounds like an unrealistic figure, and it's not clear who would come up with that sort of a number.
The Russian foreign minister has said that any security discussions about Ukraine without Moscow are a road to nowhere.
We cannot agree with the proposal to resolve security issues, collective security issues without the Russian Federation. This will not work.
And Russia has drawn a red line. It will not agree to NATO troops on Ukrainian territory.
And that means, Britain, that means any European country, essentially. So we can talk all we want about this formula, but I think it's a moot point because I don't think Kremlin has sent any signals that it would be amenable to this idea.
A lot will now depend on what kind of agreement, if any, emerges from future negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow. Ovidiusz Nicieja, reporting for TVP World.
According to Bloomberg, Donald Trump was trying to convince Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban to support Ukraine's EU accession bid. If Ukraine was to join the European Union, the move would be perceived as one of potential security guarantees. Would Orban likely consider backing the country at war, as he now stands torn between appealing to Donald Trump while keeping Vladimir Putin happy? Paweł Trzaskowski went on a search to find an answer to this question.
The Honorable Donald John Trump.
Here's an unlikely spokesman for the European Union. Following his meeting with Volodymyr Zalinski and European leaders, Donald Trump is reported to have called Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The topic of their talk, according to Bloomberg, was the Hungarian veto against Ukraine's EU membership, a conversation Orban could not be happy about.
He made a phone call to someone who definitely felt like backstabbing. When Donald Trump asks Viktor Orban to reverse 180 degrees his policy on Ukraine and to say, well, yeah, they should be welcome in the EU, let's do enlargement.
If Orban were to change his mind after this intervention, then Trump would be seen as playing
a very positive role, potentially, from the Ukrainian perspective.
Especially as Ukrainians see EU membership as part of security guarantees. Bloomberg reports that in response, Orban was to propose the Hungarian capital as a possible venue for the trilateral meeting between Trump, Zelensky and Putin. And although Washington hasn't mentioned a specific location so far,
I can tell you there are many options that are being discussed by our national security team right now with both parties.
It is Budapest that is to be among the most probable venues, beating Geneva and Moscow, which was reportedly put forward by Putin. But granting Orban the possibility to host these talks, given his stance on Ukraine, which safeguards some of Russia's interests, is also being met with some reservations in Europe.
Budapest? Not everyone may remember this, but in 1994 Ukraine already got assurances of territorial integrity from the US, Russia and the UK in Budapest. Maybe I'm superstitious, but this time I would try to find another place.
The Polish Prime Minister is referring to the Budapest Memorandum, which proved void in 2014 when Russia attacked Crimea, the first act of a war that rages on today, 11 years later. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Could Moldova take the lead in its EU accession ahead of Ukraine, despite both countries having applied in 2022 and taking active steps to get closer to the finish line? The reason behind this potential decoupling is opposition within the EU, particularly Hungary, to be exact. And as Ukraine is not satisfied with such a possible turn of events, Moldova first needs to sort out its own backyard and defeat pro-Russian forces in the September 28th general elections. Paweł Trzaskowski has more.
Ukraine and Moldova. One of the things shared by these countries, apart from their border and the Russian threat, is their EU aspirations. Both applied for EU membership in 2022 and were granted candidate status in June the same year. Since then, their accession efforts have been tied together, but now it appears they may be heading towards a decoupling.
Been quite clear from the very beginning that the circumstances of Moldova and Ukraine are very different, and probably somewhere down the road, their paths would have diverged.
The main reason for this divergence is the current Hungarian opposition towards Ukraine joining the bloc.
The accession of Ukraine into the European Union can't be allowed now.
The decoupling, if it were to happen, would most certainly meet with some opposition from the Ukrainians, as Kiev considers EU accession a key security guarantee from the West.
There can be no division between Ukraine and Moldova. That would simply be a very bad move, to my mind, and if such a division takes place, it will automatically mean that Europe is divided on Ukraine, that Europe does not have a common and strong position on guarantees.
But some experts say that if the EU paths of both countries do not diverge, none of them will be able to join the bloc soon.
Which would have sent, I think, a message that EU accession as a whole can be blocked for these countries.
But even if Moldova were given a fast-track accession option at Ukraine's expense, it would have to deal with opposition on its own territory first. While EU accession was enshrined in the country's constitution following last year's presidential election, Chisinau is still facing a crucial vote this September. The pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity needs to secure a parliamentary majority in this fall's elections to keep Moldova on its western trajectory. But Russia sees the vote as an opportunity to derail these efforts. Most recently, Moldovan fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor offered a $3,000 a month payment to anyone who protests against the government. That was one of the most blatant moves by pro-Russian forces, but hybrid warfare is being waged on many fronts. Whether Moldovans prove resilient to these efforts won't be known until after the election on September 28th. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Belarus and Iran, two countries that have backed Russia's war in Ukraine, plan to strengthen cooperation following talks between their presidents in Minsk on Wednesday. This is yet another sign of Russia's allies showcasing their cooperation in light of a recent meeting meant to bring Ukraine closer to the end of the war. Diana Skaya has this report.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko is working hard not to be left out in the cold. His latest guest in Minsk, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. The two pledged to strengthen their bilateral ties across all sectors, signing 12 agreements covering industry, health, tourism, and especially defense. Lukashenko even highlighted military technical cooperation as a key area of focus.
This is rather a reinforcement of what existed before, agreements and cooperation that have already taken place in certain areas, perhaps some expansion of this cooperation.
Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya sees it otherwise. Lukashenko met with Iran's president and vowed cooperation on many issues. This means only one thing: dragging Belarus further into war, isolation, and even nuclear threats. Belarusians don't want an Iranian scenario. We want an open, modern, safe Belarus without war or dictatorship. Pezeshkian blasted US and European unilateralism, calling sanctions against both countries illegal. Iran has become a crucial partner for Vladimir Putin, supplying drones used by Russia in its war against Ukraine. Lukashenko now appears eager to draw from the same playbook.
First and foremost, of course, the production of Shahed drones and, let's say, other projects aimed at strengthening mutual cooperation in defense. Primarily, of course, this involves drone production, including, as I believe, manufacturing drones for the Russian military industry and for conducting the war in Ukraine.
On the sidelines, Lukashenko is also testing openings with the West. Here, he is with Keith Kellogg back in June.
Can't we have a normal dialogue and talk about our affairs, about relations between Belarus and the USA?
Then, he freed opposition figures Sergei Tikhanovsky along with 13 others. A week ago, Belarusian attempts to restore relations with Warsaw was rebuffed by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
If a political dialogue will be launched, then I think it can create or recreate conditions for the restoration, at least diplomatic restorations with the Western countries.
By turning to Tehran for weapons and to Washington for attention, the question is Belarus eyeing a diplomatic reset with the West, or is it only bargaining for survival? Diana Skaya for TVP World.
They say every journey begins with a single step, but for one Ukrainian veteran, each step is a statement. Marching hundreds of kilometers across Europe, he wants the world to remember Ukraine's wounded and its ongoing war. Anastasia Yanchenko and Alexandra Bulenda followed the man who turned a long road into a loud message.
This is Andriy Madjarik, a Ukrainian veteran. Every day he covers 20 to 30 kilometers on foot, sleeps in tents, and admits the journey is grueling. But his trek has a purpose: to send a message.
My march has already attracted attention from the media, communities in Ukraine, people outside Ukraine, and EU residents. I have already covered 100 kilometers. I understand that I might not be heard in Parliament or in the European Parliament. They may not invite me to speak, but at least the Ukrainian community and the EU community will hear my message.
His call is simple: keep arming Ukraine, obtain security guarantees, and do not forget the wounded veterans, those who will live with the war long after any ceasefire is signed. Ukraine today has nearly 900,000 veterans. Some 400,000 need advanced physical therapy. Many live with amputations, traumatic brain injuries, or concussions that forever change their lives.
Every day, hundreds of thousands of soldiers risk life and limb to defend not only our independence, but the whole of Europe. We know Russia will not stop in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the situation on the front is very difficult, especially in the Donetsk area.
The beginning of Andriy's journey almost coincided with Ukraine and Russia sitting down at the negotiating table to discuss a possible peace agreement, in which Kyiv might have to give up some territories in exchange for peace.
I am personally against this because many were killed or forever disabled in the fight for these territories. However, I understand that this horror needs to end and the killing stop.
Although Andriy still has over 1,000 kilometers and many days ahead of him, he believes that completing this challenging path will help draw attention to himself and the current problems on the front. His journey is a symbol of resilience, courage and hope for a better future for Ukraine.
In pursuit of peace, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zalinski has been actively seeking a meeting with Vladimir Putin, who until recent has been reluctant to meet his counterpart to discuss an end to the war. But what this meeting may showcase even further is Putin's unwillingness to end this war. So are we going to see a meeting take place? And if it happens, who will be in charge of peacekeeping? Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me again to discuss more. Good evening and thank you for joining.
Good evening.
So today, Kyiv Independent wrote, Zelensky wants a meeting Putin wants to win. What are the chances that Zelensky-Putin meeting will actually materialize when motivations of both of these men are so drastically different?
The motivations are indeed very different. And frankly, it's crunch time for Vladimir Putin, who has been seeking to avoid this very meeting for years, and especially since the war began, since I think your viewers need no reminder, Vladimir Putin doesn't consider Zelensky a legitimate counterpart because he doesn't consider Ukraine a legitimate country. And so for him, is saying with Zelensky as his counterpart is unthinkable. But now that seems to be the only choice he has, or he has to admit to President Trump and the whole world that he is not serious about peace.
According to Bloomberg, we heard that Donald Trump held a phone conversation with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Do you think that President Trump will be able to utilize the sway that he has over Orban to do away with his opposition towards Ukraine's EU accession?
This is actually quite a clever seems to be if Budapest is indeed in play as the city that would host these talks, because frankly Viktor Orban has felt left out recently in transatlantic relations. We should remember that he is somebody who has supported Donald Trump for years against the opposition of many other European leaders. When they criticized Trump, he was steadfast in his support for Trump, and now Trump seems to essentially have sided more with senior European leaders recently. So be a way to give Viktor Orban a platform, give him an important role, and hosting peace talks is indeed an important role. And so it could be a win-win. Let's see if it is the plan that is under consideration. All we have so far are suggestions in the media. Let's see. But it would be a clever plan, I think, and a win for several reasons.
We've also heard from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who said, quote, seriously discussing security issues without Russia is a road to nowhere, claiming that Russia has to be present during the talks about the security guarantees for Ukraine. What do you think is the chance of that happening? And wouldn't this be allowing Russia to be putting the ball in its own court? What's your opinion on this?
It is a bit of a baffling suggestion, frankly, that Russia, the invader, the aggressor, should be part of talks about security guarantees for Ukraine. considering that security guarantees are needed precisely because Russia has attacked Ukraine. So I think it's a delaying tactic, it's a stalling tactic. It's yet another hurdle that the other side then has to deal with, come up with an answer to, coordinate within that group. So European leaders, Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zalinski, of course, they have to come up with some sort of joint response to that. Hopefully, a joint response, or otherwise several different responses, but nevertheless, they have to take a position on it. So I think it's the beginning of a stalling game from Vladimir Putin, where he will say, well, we want this, we want that, in terms of technicalities for the negotiations. He wouldn't say, well, I am not going to negotiate. That would tell the whole world that Russia is not interested in peace. But he can put up these protocol hurdles, and he will continue to do that.
We've heard President Trump personally tell Zelensky and European leaders during the Monday meeting that Ukraine is going to have the Article 5-like NATO protections. He skipped on providing clear description to what would this actually mean. So what do you think is Washington's solution, and how do you think the EU is actually going to adjust to that?
So what we've heard so far is that Trump has suggested that there will be no U.S. ground troops, but there could be U.S. air support. And that leaves the question, who would provide the ground troops? The UK has demonstrated or signaled willingness. France has demonstrated willingness or signaled willingness. There is some talk in Germany about whether that might be possible. But if the US is not going to do it and only provide air support, then the European countries, whoever they are, in the coalition of the willing and possibly other countries, they have to obviously do much more. But there is good news, which is that Europe's two leading military powers at the moment, France and the UK, have signaled willingness. That makes it much easier for other countries to join in that effort.
But now, as we're focusing on Europe, does Europe have the real tangible, and I mean tangible being the key word here, solution to for security guarantees for Ukraine?
Well, we don't know yet what those security guarantees will entail, what it is that Ukraine will ask for. Will it be only force, some sort of military force provided only in case of a military attack on Ukraine? Will it be some sort of peacekeeping force, i.e. is it something that would be needed the moment a peace deal is reached and peace is declared? Or would this force be something, sort of a deployable force that would be on standby as a deterrent and be deployed in case of a Russian attack on Ukraine? We don't know yet what it is Ukraine wants or would prefer, and we also don't know what it is that these different countries would be willing to provide. I think a deterrent force, so that would be deployed in case of a conflict, is the most likely scenario, simply because these countries have to use their forces in other areas, including their own countries. In Germany, for example, they already provide a brigade. In Lithuania, they just don't have enough troops to also provide some sort of standing force or put up a standing force in Ukraine without cannibalizing their troops at home.
Mm-hmm. So you think that a potential option of the coalition of the willing sending any troops to Ukraine is not in the cards?
Well, it's very much in the cards. The question is just whether that would be whether it would be a standing force deployed the moment peace is declared, or whether it would be a deterrent force that would be deployed in case of an attack on Ukraine. And frankly, Article 5 is a deterrence. It's not a standing force as such. It's not a peacekeeping force. It's a deterrent that says that if a NATO member state is attacked, the other countries will come to its aid. Those countries don't have their forces stationed in every country at any given moment. So if the Article 5 model is what we're talking about, which is the most likely scenario, then it would be a deterrent force that would be deployed in case of an attack on Ukraine.
Following the latest developments in Poland, with a Shahed drone crossing into the Polish territory and exploding, is Russia testing NATO and EU's eastern border? What's your opinion?
Russia has been doing that for a while. This is not the first incursion or incident on Polish soil linked to Russia. We have seen, as I think your viewers will remember, one of the migrants brought to the Polish border by Belarus, then stabbed a Polish border guard by launching a knife through the border fence. That is an attack that killed a Polish border guard on Polish soil. It could be considered an attack, or it is clearly an attack causing harm on NATO territory. We have also seen, of course, the rest of the weaponization of migration instigated by Belarus, but coordinated with Russia. We have also seen arson attacks on various Polish installations, as your viewers are well aware, also those as well instigated by Russia. So these non-military attacks take place regularly, and the question is, what do we do about them? If it's not a military attack, and these are not military attacks, then what do we do? And this is the dilemma, frankly, of every country, every Western country today, that countries like Russia can use non-military means to attack, and NATO is not responsible for such defense against such.
We will have to put a full stop there. Thank you so much. Elizabeth Ross, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I do hope to see you back here on TVP World soon.